Okay, it's Pipes Drums. It's April 22nd, 2022. We're really pleased today to have John Phillips here from Drum Corps International. John is a judge administrator with DCI. A lot of people in the pipe band world might have heard of DCI, Drum Corps International, but maybe don't know too much about DCI and how it operates. So we're really pleased that John can take the time today to get together with the piping and drumming world so that we can learn more about DCI. So thanks very much, John, and welcome to Pipes Drums.
Thanks, Andrew. It's great to be here. It's kind of like coming home a little bit for me. I'm Canadian, but I now live in the United States, and it's been great to catch up a little bit with you and learn a little bit about the piping community. And I look forward to maybe enlightening your audience with some information about Drum Corps International. They're celebrating their 50th anniversary, and I'm proudly wearing the 50th anniversary shirt here today for them to see.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it's our pleasure. So why don't we just start? Tell us briefly how Drum Corps International works.
Yeah, well, in 1972, there was a group of 13 different drum corps that formed what was called a combine. And they decided that they were going to try to bring together drum and bugle corps from across the country because there were these regional areas. There was a bunch of drum corps out on the East Coast and some in the Midwest and some on the West Coast. And the participants typically had contests that they would participate in that were under the auspices of some of the veterans associations. So the American Legion, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, and other entities, including service clubs. They'd host these contests, and the groups would kind of stay in their own area. Once a year, they would have a national championship that was run by one of these veterans organizations, and the corps would get together. But throughout the rest of the summer, they didn't have any way to kind of intermix. So somebody had a vision back in 1972 to try to bring together the entire country, and that's where, in a nutshell, Drum Corps International was formed.
Interesting. So before then, it was just kind of scattered, and someone had the vision to bring it together. Now, so the actual DCI drum corps, or do you call them bands, or groups, or units, or?
Yeah, they used to be referred to as drum and bugle corps because initially a lot of this goes back to post-war. So when the veterans came back from the Second World War, they wanted to have a way to create a kind of a social network to stay connected with their buddies and basically get together once a week and just reminisce about the good old days. And they also, I think it was probably a lot of pressure from the spouses. Well, what are you going to do with the kids? So they said, okay, well, we'll form these bands for them to participate in. And at the time, the sophistication of the instrument manufacturer was pretty minimal. We're talking like in the 50s and into the 60s, right? We didn't have the quality of instrument manufacturing that we do today. Although there were a lot of instrument manufacturers back then, band instruments. So anyway, they formed these groups, and they were all brass bands. A lot of them just did bugle calls. It was based a lot on the military tradition, as was the drumming. And I think there's a parallel there with the pipe bands, I would think. And then over time, people got a little bit more into experimenting and getting more creative. So like went from these straight bugles, and that's where I started. I was 10 years old. I remember playing in this firefighter-sponsored group up in Scarborough, Ontario. And, they had first instrument I ever played was a straight bugle. I could only play certain notes of the harmonic series. Then we got advanced. We got a slide that would move in and out that would allow us to change by a semitone. And then we got a piston valve that would allow it to go from one key to another, and then the slide. Then they put two valves on, and this is all what happened with drum corps. Just kind of each decade, new things started to advance. And then probably just over 10 or so years ago, they went to any keyed instrument. So you could have any kind of brass instrument out there, which even though we call them drum corps, they're really playing trumpets. They can use trombones. They're playing tubas. So they're like traditional band instruments.
Interesting. So
No
are
woodwinds though, Andrew. No woodwinds
right.
allowed, or pipes allowed.
Right. So are performers, competitors, are they full-time musicians or are they kind of hobbyist, part-time people?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, the majority of the musicians in the current drum corps setting are typically high school or university college age students. So what they do is they give up their summer basically. At least 6 weeks of the summer is devoted to the Drum Corps International Tour. So starting in mid-June, and they start to assemble what is known as the American Memorial Day weekend, late May, and then they rehearse and put the whole program together. Then they start on a tour and kind of go coast to coast, performing at events throughout the week. Each weekend is more of a major event, and then they have their Grand National Championship. It's held this year in Indianapolis, Indiana, and it has actually been there since 2009. And there's a question about that a little bit later. I think we're going to get to in terms of how it's evolved. But yeah, so they're pretty much up to the age of 22 years old.
Interesting. So and how is it subsidized? I mean, the performers, the members of the drum corps, you're talking about a full-time kind of thing during the summer. But so are they housed and fed and where does the money come from for, say, the current world champions, the Phantom Regiment?
Yeah, as you can imagine, it's quite a bit of a budget expenditure to take 150 plus young people on the road, plus their staff to teach them, plus people to feed them. They have, they basically it's like a traveling road show, like a circus. It goes from town to town with these trucks rolling in, and the carnival gets there, and they unload and rehearse, staying at different schools. They sleep on gym floors. A lot of the times they'll have air mattresses and sleeping bags, and they sleep on the bus, sleep on the gym floor, get up, rehearse, go and do a contest in the evening, load up the trucks, and off they go again. So there's a bit of money involved. And how does that work? Three things primarily. Number one is each member pays dues to participate. So they have a fee, and it ranges. It used to be in the hundreds of dollars. Now it's in the thousands of dollars. And then they also have various fundraising activities that their board of directors for each individual group is responsible for, helping to find the funds to and sponsorship to take care of their organization. And then the final thing is the contest money. So they get an appearance fee. So when they perform at these events, the parent body, Drum Corps International, will guarantee each of them so much of the royalties, if you will, that they take in over the course of the summer.
And then there would be prize money on top of that?
It used to
Or,
be like that, but now it's rather than first place gets the biggest share of the pie. It's kind of a guaranteed pay by performance sort of thing. So if you
I
show
see.
up, you're going to get X amount of dollars. And I wish I could share with you the amount. It's not because I'm trying to hold anything back. I really don't even have any idea what that would be these days.
Right. Okay. So are DCI events always competitions or are they sometimes just kind of performances, concerts?
They're almost exclusively competitions. DCI brands itself as Marching Music's Major League, and so it really has this embedded competitive atmosphere. Although it's highly educational, and that's one of the reasons kids will pay thousands of dollars to march in a drum corps, because in the course of the summer they're going to be taught by some of the very best in this what we call pageantry world, the marching band and drum corps world, and they'll learn a lot because down here in the United States, many of these students who may be future music educators are going to have their first job, and they're going to be having to have their own marching band at their high school. So they're learning firsthand what it takes to do this from the very top tier structures in our area.
Yeah, and I'd imagine that these are really good musicians, like the best of the best coming out of junior high schools and high schools and going on to, Berkeley, even to major in music or something like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So what about are there grades? The pipe band world has grades, grade one, grade two, grade one's the highest on down to grade five usually. Are there grades of of units of drum corps with DCI?
So it's evolved to the point where there are really only two divisions now in Drum Corps International. You know, back when it got started, it grew rapidly. There were, as I mentioned, there were 13 groups that formed this combine, but there were hundreds of groups across the United States. And when DCI in the first 3 or 4 years, when they'd have the international championships from North America, I mean, several hundred groups would show up, and then they'd be in different classes, you know, based on their size, based on their age. You know, there even used to be an all girls classification, all girls, and Ontario, Canada had a number of all girl drum corps. I don't know if any of your audience is interested in that, but one of the top ones was from Kitchener, Ontario, a group called the Ventures. They won the all girl class for about 5 years as the champion in their class.
Hmm.
There was one from Sarnia, from Brantford, from up in Sault Ste. Marie. So there were several, and even in Quebec, there was a very strong all-girl group from Quebec called Les Châtelaines, a very
Hmm.
creative group. And so those classifications, though, over time, you know, as we go from decade to decade, I mean, if you think of the '70s compared to what happened in 2000 and the technology and just where the world is at, there's less interest to have that broad classification. So there are fewer drum corps today, although there really is a number, probably the number of performers. They're bigger groups, and so there's quite several thousand of performers each summer who get together for these championships. But there's really only two classifications. They call it open class. They're younger groups. Typically, those are the high school bands or drum corps, I should say. And then there's the world class, which is where the top tier of the drum and bugle corps world resides.
Okay. So the international part of that, is that worldwide, or are we really just talking about the United States and Canada, or um, is it open to say a drum corps in Switzerland?
It
Or
is actually, yeah.
okay.
And occasionally, I mean, the last 2 years have been unusual for everybody. So we haven't, well, we just didn't have drum corps for a couple of years. Although last year they did have a tour. It was non-competitive. You asked about the competition. So there was a 1 year of DCI without competition. And a number of the corps still came out and performed fewer events, but still had audience. But typically there will be a group. We've had groups from Holland, the United Kingdom. There was the last time DCI was held in 2019. There was a group from Ireland. We've had groups from South America, Central America, Japan, Taiwan. So there's an international presence. They have their own classification because they have a different. They don't have school music like we have here in the United States, and so it's much more difficult for them to reach the standard that we would see at the top of the world championship level.
Hmm. Okay. And you talked about the drum corps becoming bigger, and there are actually fewer of them now. The pipe band world is kind of sort of going through the same thing, where pipe bands have grown, especially at the top levels, to a larger size, and the entire community as a whole has shrunk as a result, if that makes sense. Uh,
Mhm.
but the competitions are as serious, and the standard is as great as ever for the pipe band world.
Yeah.
So, is that a situation you're happy with on the DCI side, or are you trying to rectify that and somehow?
Yeah, it's less about having more and more about having good quality within the organizations. And it's not only about the quality that we see on the field and the performance quality, but it's about the quality of life for the members. It's the member experience and making sure, because they're touring around like this, they're away from home for several weeks during the summer, 6 weeks really, and they have to be fed and taken care of, and um, and have good health, you know. So it's all about rehearsing smarter and just being conscious of students' well-being, the
Hmm.
participants' well-being, and I
Yeah,
think that's the important part, right? So um, yeah, I don't think it's a good or a bad thing that there are fewer groups, as long as what they're doing and the kind of training that they're receiving is really at the highest level.
yeah. So, okay, you know, I think for the pipe band world, we see DCI events and you're filling massive stadiums, or at least have a huge, very big crowds compared certainly to the pipe band world. At what point did DCI become kind of this stadium, filling spectacle, really? When did DCI realize that it had something really sellable on its hands?
Sure. Well, I think right out of the gate, 50 years ago, the first DCI event was held at a university stadium, University of Whitewater in Wisconsin. And there's a plaque there still commemorating the very first Drum Corps International event that was held there. And there used to be a summer marching band. So, of course, the marching band and drum corps are slightly different in that the marching bands, the school marching bands, have woodwinds in them, but the drum corps are only brass instruments and the percussion. So it started in Whitewater, Wisconsin. They had them in various, for a long time, in different college stadiums and universities. I think the next year after Whitewater went to Cornell University. Then it was in Pennsylvania, one of the universities in Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And so the first probably 10 years, the DCI was held in college university stadiums. Although some events were also held in professional football stadiums. And for the listeners overseas, when I say football, I don't mean soccer, I mean American football. And the yeah, so that the stadiums that have that football presence, they've got everything there. They got all the concessions and all the space. And the reason that they really had to have these bigger venues is because it's not only the one group that you see on the field, but when you bring 50 of them together, they've all got buses and trucks and equipment and food trucks and all of that stuff. So you have to have the infrastructure to be able to do it
Mhm.
for our national championships, which is why they have those very large venues for these events.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes total sense. Now, okay, we've learned quite a bit about DCI already, and I think our perception of DCI has changed if we had one before. But what's your perception of pipe bands as you understand them?
Well, I have a little bit of experience with pipe bands. I actually, I have some Irish heritage, so and I realize the Irish pipes are different than the Scottish pipes, but I'm familiar with them in a lot, mostly because I've adjudicated a number of parades throughout my lifetime, and sometimes, even though I'm not a piper per se, they will include any band, whether it's a pipe band or a school marching band, even bands on floats. And the judges have to make some kind of an assessment of that. So I did a little bit of research, learned a little bit about the pipes and the drums, and so when I judge parades, the occasional time, I'll be responsible for making some comments to the pipe bands and giving them a score.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I
Yeah.
also wanted to say, my perception, I did a little bit of digging around on your website, and I was interested to learn that, the pipe band world is going through some evolution as well, and technology has woven its way into the design of the instruments. Certainly, we know in the percussion world, there's advances in there. There's obviously the traditions of what you're doing is certainly strong, and I think that's important. I would encourage you to hold on to that tradition because it's very special and unique. But I think that if the technology can enhance it for the performer and also for the listener, that's not a bad thing.
Hmm. Interesting thoughts. Yeah. So why don't we wrap up this part? We'll talk a little bit about that technology, but also talk about judging and how assessment and happens in DCI events and some of the issues around that. So let's stay tuned for that.
Okay.